Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this short session. Now, if you have a customer or a potential customer who just simply wants to print directly to a device, no driver headaches, no complicated setup, and still use secure print whenever they need it, then you're in the right session. So, with that said, I will outline what I will cover through this presentation. Okay, here's the lineup. I'll introduce universal output queue, explain how it works in standard networks, and show how it operates in zero trust environments too. We will then walk through the user experience, which is very simple, highlight when this approach is recommended, and review the subscriptions and hardware needed to support it. Finally, I'll share with you a few common questions to help guide your customer conversations. So with that outline in place, let's begin with the technology. It's not a deep dive, but just the technology behind the universal output queue. So the universal output queue keeps printing very simple by allowing users to send jobs to any printer in the location through one universal print queue using the universal printer driver. A smart client maintains the printer list and routes each job correctly without users managing individual drivers or indeed configurations. This is supported in terms of traditional universal output queue behavior, where the smart client and the printers communicate over the local network. So in a typical traditional network. However, some customers may have implemented zero trust security models where devices may not be directly reachable on the network. Well, they basically aren't. It's important to understand that universal output queue also works in these environments too. So with that, let's take a brief look at what zero trust means before we explain how the universal output queue operates inside this network model. Okay, so for those of you that aren't too familiar with the zero trust environment, basically it blocks direct workstation to printer communication. Basically any device that is on the network, and they just can't speak to each other. It's unreachable. Now this stops the normal universal output queue workflow if a customer is within the zero trust environment. But hey, customers should not have to relax zero trust controls just to make printing work. The universal output queue operates in zero trust environments, but only with certain compatible devices, which I will share later throughout the presentation. So let me quickly explain these differences and how it actually works in zero trust. So to support this environment, universal output queue changes how it actually routes print jobs. Now, instead of using the local network where everything's all connected, the smart client sends the print job to the cloud, uniFLOW Online, and supported MEEP or add-on devices simply retrieve it directly. Now, this avoids workstation to printer communication and keeps the workflow aligned with the zero trust requirements and principles. So a nice big tick in the box there. Now, only supported MEEP and add-on models can retrieve these jobs in this mode, and zero trust compatibility, something that you don't have to get yourself too overly familiar with, but I think I mentioned it, needs to be enabled on the tenant or the actual location level where the output queue printing is going to be done. So now the user experience basically stays the same as if it was on the traditional networking. So it's just the way how the print job is actually routed. So now let's move to the user experience, which is very important to show how this looks in practice. So for users, the workflow remains simple and consistent. A smart client window pop-up appears, letting them choose a Canon or indeed a non-Canon device and select immediate printing, direct printing for non-sensitive documents, or indeed, when the need arises, they can select secure printing for those sensitive documents that no prying eyes can take a look at. Now they can adjust finishing options before sending the job, And Smart Client manages the drivers in the background, which is a big tick in the box for IT, as well as for the user themselves. Now, the option to remember the selection helps users who move between different rooms or meetings during the day, which is a very nice feature. You can see on the screen there, hey, don't remember this particular printer that I selected, or all the other different options there in terms of when the system will remember the device that was chosen. So with that, now let's look at the key benefits. Let's just sum it all up in terms of the universal output queue. So universal output queue, it just removes the need for users or indeed IT to manage printer drivers, and works well in environments with varied different devices and workflows. It supports any regular office printer and fits mixed vendor setups as well. Universal output queue also works in both traditional, which is basically standard networks, and also zero trust environments too. But I must emphasize that zero trust support is only for MEEP and add-on devices. A very key thing to remember. Now, this gives customers the flexibility in terms of regardless what network model they have. So traditional networks, tick in the box. Zero trust, tick in the box. You're good to go. So with that, let's explore some real world use cases, just to help that frame how this works in your mind. So what I want to do is start with a simple example where users basically are sitting right next to the device. So with that, reception environments often require immediate printing, for example, for guest passes, labels, or confirmations, etc. Users are physically next to the device. Documents are not really that sensitive, and authentication basically would slow down the actual workflow process. Universal output queue provides fast, predictable printing with minimal interaction and no driver management or printer settings for the actual user. Couldn't be any more simpler. Now let's look at another environment where fast direct printing supports continuous activity within the business. So with this particular use case, it's a warehouse team who prints labels, picking lists, dispatch notes throughout the whole day. These low sensitive documents are produced in shared environments, so authentication just adds another delay without any real benefit. Devices are often spread across large operational zones, so users need fast, predictable printing at the nearest device for their convenience. So universal output queue supports this by just sending the jobs directly and keeping workflows moving. These two use cases are just a sample of common scenarios for universal output queue, including printing, visitor badges, and some of the things I've just mentioned before. But I am sure that you will come up with some really creative ideas, and maybe your customers will give you some good insight in terms of what they require for direct printing, also with the ability for secure printing if needed. So with that, these two use cases that I've covered, we can now summarize the subscriptions and hardware needed to support them. So the table that you can see on the screen shows the subscriptions and hardware needed for universal output queue and secure printing across Canon and indeed non-Canon devices. Universal output queue sends smart client, so uses smart client with cloud print and scan type 1 and type 2 if required. Secure printing on Canon devices uses the same subscription with the embedded applet. For non-Canon devices, secure printing depends on basically the embedded applet support. So for example, Lexmark and Sharp, we now offer embedded options for selected models for those brands. Now, when embedded release is not available, uniFLOW Release Station provides secure identification and release at the non-Canon device. Universal output queue also, as I've mentioned many times, works in zero trust environments. Now, in this mode, jobs are routed, as I've said before, via the cloud and only supported via the MEEP or add-on devices to retrieve these print jobs. Now, for a complete list of the supported MEEP and add-on devices, please see the uniFLOW online technical data sheet and product information guides, which you can find on our partner site. So with that, the subscriptions and hardware, which is clear, we can now move on to the frequently asked questions, which is a new thing that I've introduced in this particular webinar. So just a quick, I'm not going to go through all of the questions and what the answers could possibly be, but just to give you a quick summary, Universal Output Queue works across locations when Smart Client manages the queue and printer lists. Good job. Direct printing is enabled through Cloud Print and Scan with the Smart Client, and secure printing depends on whether the device has an embedded applet or requires a release station. Universal Output Queue also works in zero trust environments, but only on supported MEEP and add-on devices that can retrieve jobs via the cloud. There's a few more questions on the next slide, which I'll share with you. Smart Client reduces IT effort by managing the universal driver and lowering support needs and indeed costs managing drivers. Now, users can authenticate with cards, PIN, or indeed mobile identification for secure release. Secure print jobs can be released at supported devices, Canon devices, or non-Canon devices with the release station. Zero trust support is limited to MEEP, again, and add-on devices, trying to make that extremely clear in terms of that job sitting in the cloud. Only the MEEP and add-on devices support this functionality. So here's a short one. This brings me to the final slide of the session to wrap up. So thank you for taking the time to join this session on the Universal Output Queue. Today's discussion provided a clear snapshot of how Universal Output Queue simplifies everyday office printing using a single queue and driver, consistent behavior, less effort for IT, and support for both traditional networks and zero trust environments on supported MEEP and add-on devices. We also discussed on practical use cases you can recognize and repeat in customer conversations, or indeed spot them for yourselves. For sales discussions, this session should be a great starting point to identify where Universal Output Queue and secure print fit for your customers. So thank you again for your time, and I'll see you on the next one.